With the capital of Jane.
You probably are, yes, definitely.
You've got the range on budget. And it looks committee business to take real quick. We approve meeting minutes, and I'm going to assume everybody had an opportunity to take a look at those. Are there any adjustments to the minutes?
Most part, I did not share that.
I would, yeah. Noted. Thank you. Any other adjustments? I entertain a motion.
I agree. I move that we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Trigger. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so now we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. We have some guests here today.
We all can introduce ourselves or me first or what?
We can do introductions. Yeah.
So my name is Janice Reynolds and I currently work as the Director of Human Resources at United Way Lake County.
And I'm Eliza Kaczynski. I'm the Senior Classification and Compensation Analyst for the.
Steve O'Grady, County Administrator. For below then, citizen member, Lane County Budget Committee.
Chris Weber, citizen member.
That far, Board of Commissioners.
David Lovell, Board of Commissioners.
Right, so I got Commissioner.
And Sarah Moon, citizen member of the committee.
Thank you, belong.
Yeah.
And
Oh, we do. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Trigger, please.
Thank you. Yes, Lori Trigger, Vice Chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. The audio is a little garbled. I wonder if we could spread, I don't know if the table mics maybe aren't spread out. That would help. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Chris Pryor, hi.
And then we have as the assessor. Please.
Hi, I'm Mary Vuxit Schaefer, the Assessor Tax Collector of Lane County. And Sarah, this is the second time I've seen you virtually today.
Oh, good. You got to see me on the other. Yes. Thank you. I'm quickly changing gears. Yes, thank you. All right. Devin, do you want to introduce yourself? No, probably not.
Devin Ashbridge, Public Information Officer for Lane County. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Jennifer, I'm sorry, I can't read that. Jennifer.
I'm Jennifer Violet. I'm an analyst in the budget office.
Thank you. Okay.
Christine Levy, Budget Manager for the county.
This is my so many projects.
I'll start in the budget office.
Darcy Dillon, I'm standing in for Alana Holmes, Chief HR Officer.
Thanks, everybody.
So thank you. So I have some talking points and you guys have the agenda. So I want to go over my talking points and then I'm done. Questions? Okay. So the EOCB, Elected Officials Compensation Board, is a 5-member citizen board charged under the state law with reviewing elected officials' compensation on a yearly basis and providing recommendations to the budget committee and the board. The EOCB makes a recommendation to the budget committee, who then makes a recommendation to the board of commissioners for final approval. And then the Lane charter limits the effective dates for the adjustments for commissioners. So they have to occur after the general election. The assessor, the district attorney, the justice of the peace, and the sheriff all received market adjustments effective January of 2022. There have been no market adjustments for the commissioners since 2016, though they've received 2% cost of living adjustments in 2019 and 2020. EOCB met 4 times, January to May of 2023. We have reviewed total compensation in comparison to our 5 county comparators: Clackamas, Deschutes, Jackson, Marion, and Washington. Total comp includes not just the base salary, but also the value of benefits such as health insurance, retirement contributions, and stipends. However, that does not include leave time, since the different counties standard leave for elected officials in different ways. So we reviewed for comparison against direct reports. Comparison is when the salary range for a direct report is very close to or more than that of their supervisor. We produced two options for consideration of the budget committee. Option one matches compensation for elected officials to comparator average. Option two matches compensation to within 5% of comparator average. Lane County has historically considered compensation that is plus or minus 5% of comparator averages to be highly competitive. Both options also address compression if it existed and provided a 2% COLA in line with the COLAs that were previously approved for other Lane County employees. Now, the sheriff and justice of the peace were both aligned with the comparator average and were not experiencing compression. In both options, only the 2% COLA is recommended. Now, the district attorney was only slightly under the comparator average. Option one provides a 1.78 market adjustment in addition to the 2% COLA to bring the compensation in line with the comparator. The district attorney is not experiencing compression. The district attorney receives the bulk of their compensation directly from the state. We are comparing the county's contribution to the contributions made by other counties. The assessor is both under market and experiencing compression. Option one provides a 5.81 market adjustment in addition to the 2% COLA, which aligns with the assessor's compensation within the comparator average. Option two provides a 5.43% compression adjustment in addition to the 2% COLA, which ensures appropriate difference between the assessor and their highest paid direct report. The board commissioner's compensation is 27.6% below the comparator average. Their base salary is over $23,000 less than the lowest paid comparator county. The EOCB remains very concerned about the sizable and growing gap between the county commissioner compensation and the market average. Option one provides a 27.22% market adjustment in addition to the 2% COLA to match the comparator average. Option two provides a 20.81% market adjustment in addition to the 2% COLA to bring the commissioner compensation to a point that is 5% below the comparator average. So unlike the other elected officials, any adjustments to the Board of Commissioners compensation could not take effect until January 2025. Those are my notes. So do any of you guys have any questions or comments? There are more details in the packet, as you guys have probably.
You mentioned compression. You said it was on two. One was the assessor, and was there another one?
No, just the assessor.
Okay.
Yeah. Sheriff and adjusted fees.
I have a question. I'm reading in the packet and I don't know, can you tell me when the last time the commissioners had a annual base salary adjustment?
Yes.
You say
Last salary adjustment.
So the commissioners last received a market adjustment in 2016. And though they did receive COLAs in 2019 and 2020.
Okay.
And so it's been a while.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. I will just say, again, as I did last year, this is a uniquely awkward and difficult position for commissioners because we have to vote to raise our own salaries, and that is often weaponized. And that means that we are at risk of continuing to create inequity in compensation for leadership of the organization and for the community as a whole, as we see a movement for elected office to be recognized for the professionalism that it is, and the challenges of recruiting, particularly non-traditional candidates to run for office because of historic inequities and the compounding effect of that. And so, we're going to wrestle with this every time until someone is bold enough, frankly, and brave enough on the commission, until we have a majority ready to do the right thing, and help the community understand why that matters. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess really the primary question I would have is what will be the impact on the budget of this move? I mean, that's always the bottom line. How does it impact the annual operating budget?
Yeah, the costing is in the packet that was emailed to you. So I will tell you that all of these positions are in the general fund. So you do see the impacts there, but it does, vary by year. So just to give you an idea, if you don't have it in front of you, option 1 in the current fiscal year would be about $26,000. That's fully loaded. That's because the commissioners would not take effect as mentioned until January of 2025. So that 24-25 year would experience half of a year of commissioner adjustments. So the total that year would be almost 120,000. And then that third year, when you see a full year of commissioners, would be just over 213,000. So.
Yeah, I think that was I saw that, and I saw the first year looked relatively modest, and the second year was a relatively big hit. And I just want to know what do we have any projections for what that would represent?
Are you asking, would that result in some type of?
I mean, some context about general fund budget.
Would there have to be a reduction in service somewhere else? Would you have to reduce services somewhere else? If you've got a pot that's only so big and you're cutting it into slices and one slice gets bigger, does another slice have to get smaller? Or do you anticipate being able to generate revenues or some other source of income to compensate for that? I don't know. I'm asking just out of curiosity.
Yeah, and I would say it's difficult to answer that exactly because, as you mentioned, revenue is changing at the same time that expenses are changing. So, of course, there's give and take in a budget whenever you build it, but we're building them each year. So all of that's taken into account. Steve, do you want to add anything?
Just that, generally what we talk about is our revenues in the general fund are growing 3 to 4% a year, and our expenses on average are growing more like 5, 6, 7%. And it does depend, we have 8 bargaining units in Lane County. So every year we're bargaining on average, at least two contracts. Most of them have an impact on the general fund, and many of them have impacts on various funds. And we don't budget because we don't know what those contracts. So it's a similar dynamic, right? You've got these 8 bargaining units, plus you have non-represented employees that don't have a contract, but they represent about 200 employees. So if you just look at all of our employees, we have growth that we know is happening there, that we do budget in, that we account for in the budget, COLAs that have been adopted through negotiations by the board. They've been adopted, health insurance and PERS increases that we know are happening. We budget for those. But then, for example, we have 2 units next year. No, 3. We have 3 units. We have 2 AFSCME units, AFSCME General and AFSCME Nurses. And then our Parole and Probation Union, all whose contracts are up next July 1st. So we will be negotiating. So as it relates to next year's budget, it's a question mark. And I think at least AFSCME General Unit has an impact on the general fund. And so I'm just trying to, there's always going to be a cost. We know there's likely going to be a cost increase as a result of what's negotiated there. What that's going to look like, we don't know. So to answer your question, there's not really, we can't increase fees, and we're not increasing property taxes beyond what is already established and what the growth in the market is, which the assessor can talk about. But that's really, so the growth in revenue in the general fund, again, in a good year, 4%, but our expenses are exceeding that. That's what the gap is. So we still have a gap to close. As the budget committee remembers from last year, we closed about half of the $7.26 million shortfall. We have another gap to close. So I don't know if that helps necessarily resolve the issue, but at least it gives you a lay of the land of some of the uncertainties of cost escalation and revenue constraints.
Maybe just a little.
I apologize.
I guess
Can I just ask a clarifying point? I just missed the beginning of your question, Chris. I was having some audio problem.
Yeah.
Were you asking about commissioners specifically or for all elected officials, what the impact?
Well, let me just put on my PR hat for a minute. When you're talking about raising the commissioner's salary, and this is piggybacking on your comment, when you talk about raising a commissioner's salary by 25%, that has the impact of saying they're increasing their salary by a quarter while they're cutting other places. And so my question was really getting at, are we going to be able to go out to the public and say, yeah, we approved an increase in salary for the commissioners. And I guess I'm focusing on the commissioners because the other ones look probably more modest. But a 25 or 27% increase in salary for the commissioners, I realize is bringing them into parity, but it's also a significant amount of money. And while I'm not necessarily quibbling with the fairness of that or the equity of that, or that the commissioners deserve it, I'm saying, do you really want to go to the public and say, we're going to raise their salaries 25 to 27%, and then we're going to cut services somewhere else? That's going to be very hard for them to swallow. That's my only concern. I'm not against giving the commissioners a pay rise at all. But at the same time, I don't want the county to be hit with a claim that the elected officials are raising their own salaries while they're cutting other services. That's all it is. And if we can, that's why I asked the question, what's the impact going to be on the budget? If it looks like we can say, no, we're not going to have to delete a bunch of services and lay a bunch of people off so we can raise the commissioner's salary. If we can say that, then that will be great. And I'll take my PR cap off and say, I don't want this to be about, I don't think they deserve it. They absolutely do, particularly when they're among the lowest paid in the state. But I also want to be able for the county to come through this without getting a black eye. That's really all I'm saying.
Maybe just in response to that would be, I think going back to what Steve just said, is there's already existing issues in the general fund. So I guess that would just be something for everyone to consider, that it might not be directly correlated to this, but we can't say that there wouldn't be reductions happening at the same time. So that distinction will be difficult.
I would just say, I don't believe any action the budget committee of the board took on this issue is going, I mean, there is a differential between the options and there is some level of impact, but it's not, in my view, going to make or break the budget outcome in the general fund next year or in future years. It's the totality of the check. And of course, we've said, of course, our goal is to not have to pursue reductions in services or employment in Lane County. We're trying to do everything we can to we have some real big challenges, but I don't think the action here today is going to make or break. We have some much bigger challenges to wrestle with. So once that's cool.
I have a question, or it's more of a comment. I think, Chris, to your point about sort of the optics of a 27% increase for the commissioners, I agree. The optics and the timing are less than ideal. I understand that. And if you fast forward, say that this doesn't get passed and 4 or 5 years from now, the budget committee looks at this again, then they're out of alignment by 40%. So there, at some point, there has to be a catch up. And maybe, and I don't know, this is a question for the budget committee, is there a tiered approach that can be taken? So the increase is, if it is, passed and agreed on, that, that 26-27% gap can be over 2 years to sort of mute some of the optics of that.
Well, I think that was a question in the group. I wasn't called to speak at the meeting. But it does, my comment kind of is in that same vein, which is, over the years, each year we look at this and the gap between our fellow commissioners across the street, across the state grow and grow and grow. So last year it was, I think, still in the 20s, but not 27 and stuff. And so every year, like next year, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't do anything. The discrepancy will be 30%, and then it just will continue to grow. And I mean, I'll take a stab at what the assessor says. We have the choice as commissioners to do whatever we want when it comes to this. I mean, we have lots of options.
I will say that the one thing that it is in the Lane charter, that any changes that the commissioners vote on for their own salaries can't take effect until after the next general election. Suggestions that you make, that whatever you recommend, whatever you vote on, would not be able to take effect until 2025, which would preclude doing, a 2024 and 2025 adjustments. You could probably do a 2025 and a 2026 and split it up that way. If you're starting to get further out than that, that I think would produce some different challenges as far as trying to predict things, make those recommendations 4 or 5 years. So, but that splitting it would be.
Commissioner Bond.
Thanks. I'll speak historically on this a little bit. It's 2013, I think, when I first voted against a market rate adjustment of the commissioners. And every time it's come up since then, I voted against market rate adjustment because I've called us. That being said, in 2013, we had a very, very different picture. In 2013, we just followed draconian cuts in the county. The entire department, the entire institution was flash. And we're still reeling from it. We're still reeling from tremendous layoffs, and that really was around for the longest time. A lot of people, honestly, what did it feel like to the staff? It would have been outrageous for commissioners to consider anytime since then, because it really still is reverberating around. And that being said, this is a relatively small increase in terms of the entire budget. So I think we're at a very different point in time, considering how will people look at it. None of the other commissioners were here when we did the non-representative employees increase, which was what year was that? That was in that, which was a pretty significant for some staff members. And even though we tried to tone it down. But it was pretty significant, but it brought us to a point where the future boards didn't have to worry about it. I mean, anybody who says that kicking the can down the road isn't going to do the future any good, it's going to make it much more difficult. Because as Commissioner Buck says, the gap will widen. Right now, Franklin County Commissioners do. I've not been a comment on how much work they do versus how much work they do. But they're making a significant. I mean, county commissioners, that gap is not going to get closer. So as the board looks through this, my term ends December 30 next year, 2024. So I'm not voting for a pay increase for me, unless I were to be reelected. But that's that's all speculating. In fact, so for me, is that becomes less of an issue. But what you really have to consider is what do we do in the future by not biting it. And it's distasteful. Anybody in this room has got to believe it's distasteful. It's particularly distasteful to the 5 people who are going to sign yes on this, should it come to that. But what's the best for the future? How do we reconcile what could potentially be a much nastier discussion 2, 4, 6 years from now?
Thanks, Commissioner Burr. So I have Bruce, Commissioner Lovell, and then Commissioner Traeger.
I'm pretty much everything's been said. I'm kind of echoing because it is about perception. I mean, 27% is huge. Even if it's only $500, 27%, that's the only number that people will recall. But I agree with Commissioner Parham. Something needs to be done. We can't keep kicking the can down the road because next year will get worse. So, and maybe, Mary had maybe we can do it in increments. I don't know if that's possible, as kind of got maybe yes, maybe no, it creates other issues. But we got to start. We can't just not do anything. That's.
And part of my interruption was the last thing I wanted to say was I'm not in favor of increments. Do it.
Okay.
That's
Okay. And I'm not against that. I'm just going is I just go with the perception of 27%. Although if you look, the last several years, whether it's a union, it's whatever it is, I mean, those are not out of line. That is what's happened in the country as far as wage increases. So, but there will be, as I said, there will be comments made.
Thank you, Chair. I come from a very different perspective on this. I was 2 months into my campaign before I realized this was a paid position at all. So I started in the gig with a very different perspective. But I want to go back 10 minutes into the discussion when Vice Chair Trigger said something about there needs to be someone on the commission that needs to take a courageous step. And she kind of left me hanging on a branch. I'd like to know more about what she meant by that, if she wouldn't mind expounding on that. And that's what I'd like to ask.
Okay, well, Commissioner, next, so Commissioner Trigger.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, it actually goes well with the comment I wanted to make. When Commissioner Buck said we can do whatever we want, as in ultimately this is a recommendation from the budget committee that the board then votes on whether to take the recommendation or not, whatever that recommendation may be. And so, but we do whatever we want also in terms of how we manage, as Chris Pryor brought up, potential perception. That is up to the commissioners. That's part of leadership, is how do we bring the community along with difficult decisions that we're faced with and that we might make. So what I meant by that is that if we want to feed into a narrative and frame this one way, we can do that. If we want to frame it another way, we can do that. So I'm not necessarily advocating to bring us right into market in one fell swoop. I agree. Some people will find a way and they'll pitch it as, 27%, and how could they, and whether we have other cuts or not. Correlation is not causation, but that won't matter in the court of public opinion. But we shape that public opinion if we so choose to, by how we talk about this, how we respond to questions about it. And so that's what I mean about being bold, is I guess before that comes understanding what structural, we talk about a structurally balanced budget. So what structural inequality looks like, and what compounding inequities look like, and what it means to the organization and to the community we serve if we choose to use this conversation one way versus another.
Thank you for sharing that, Commissioner. Appreciate that.
Are there any other comments, questions?
Just one basic tenet regarding leadership. Leadership's always telling the truth. Leaders always tell the truth. They never change their view on things. They never lie about people. They never obfuscate. They never try to hide. That's true leadership. And the fact is, really, at this point in time, whatever we do, we've got to shine a bright light on it so people do understand that we're all able to tell the message of why it is we're doing what we're doing, and tell it in a way that people, that there's no equivocation on it. And if we decide to go with the entire 27% at this point in time for future boards, well, let's once again shine a bright light on it. That's leadership. Telling people what you're doing, telling people what you're going to do, doing it, and telling them what to do, and you live with the consequences. In my first 6 years on the Eugene City Council, there's no pay at all. And that was a lot of hours of work. Commissioner Lovell said that he thought there was no pay here. Then my last 4 years on the city council was less than minimum pay. And then when I was a state rep, less than minimum wage. So what we're looking at here are wages that really attract people who potentially can be high contributors to the future of this county.
Chris, I see your hand. Commissioner Trigger, I don't know if that's a new hand or an old hand, but we'll go to Chris first.
Thank you. I'll be quick. A phrase that keeps passing through my head as we have this conversation that seems pivotal for me is the phrase "out of whack." And I think when you're trying to talk about why you need to do something as dramatic as a 25 or 27% adjustment, and I wouldn't call it a raise, because what you're doing is you're adjusting something that is out of whack. And so I think it's easier for people to grasp the concept when you say, this particular area of the county's budget has gotten out of whack, and we've got to adjust it to bring it back into balance, or whatever word you want to use. Because if you use the word, they're just voting themselves a pay raise, yeah, the optics of that are terrible. But if you say, you know, commissioners' salaries are out of whack, and then you have the documentation to show compared to other, you know, whatever you want to have, and say, we need to balance it or it's going to continue to get more out of whack. So we've got to stop the whacking now so it just doesn't get worse. And to me, that would have a much better positive impact on me to know that what the county's trying to do is stop an out of whack situation and bring it back into balance. I could probably live with that a lot more easily, and that would go down a lot easier.
Very scientific.
Yeah, I love the technical term.
Don't get him started on whack-a-mole.
I see the assessor's hand, but go ahead.
Thank you. I would like to call attention to running for office, and it's expensive. It's a financial investment. It's a time investment, and it's accessible to people with the means to do it, particularly positions that don't compensate financially very much. So I think to even the playing field for future commissioners, that it's a good idea to take this into consideration, because it's not, you know, we should have lots of people running for office, but some people just can't afford it because the seat that they're running for does not pay very much. It would be nice if, you know, if people could just run for office and it, you know, they would get compensated for it, but that's not happening everywhere. Maybe a little bit more with this group than some city officials, the mayor. I mean, you know, so what I'm saying is, I think you really have to be independently, financially wealthy, or have means outside of, you know, the salary of the position that you're going for. So I just want to say that there's an equity issue also at play that we need to consider. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else?
Refresh my memory, is this vote in the charter needs to be unanimous by the commission? Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question, or if there was a question, what the answer was.
I asked Commissioner if the vote by charter needed to be unanimous, and the answer was no.
Yes, I have a question for you. How far out are who from our competitors as far as commissioners again?
No.
That number down.
Or you want a number or date?
Percentage. So.
I think
Oh, there it is.
it's
27.6.
Then option 2, we would bring it within 5 years. But we are currently at 27.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Trigger nailed it with, this is a very awkward situation, especially for someone that's been in this job for 9 months. I mean, it's tough to come in and give yourself a raise the first 9 months you've been on it, and still learn where the bathrooms are in the building. But we're not doing ourselves any favors, really. If you 35% we're out next year, and that makes the
the gap even harder for this new smoke pricing to figure out. So it's a tough call. It's a very tough decision. For bringing this here.
So did I tell you that? Yes, of course. Our recommendation, did I say what's our, for the OCB recommendation?
I don't know. I read one or two, but
Well, it bears repeating.
We have been on these subjects for many months and, talking about it as you guys all feel too, if we don't address it now, it's only going to get larger and larger and larger. And it's going to be hard to retain and attract future talent. So that I'm a recruiter. I work at HR, but part of my job is recruiting, and I do know how hard it is to get good talent. So if we want to keep the good talent and retain, get great talent in the future, then I think we need to address these. So I think the recommendation of the OCB is to bring.
So that would be option.
Yes, that would be option 127. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Commissioner Hutchins.
Yeah, I completely understand what you just said because I've been there. And timing is a really big part of this decision, I think, in particular. I remember when we had our meeting on budgeting during COVID, and that was a time when people were getting laid off, their jobs were going away, and for me, it just wasn't appropriate at that time. And we didn't have at least that year. But the timing's different now. I think a key piece that you mentioned is there's been no market adjustment since 2016. And I think if you talk to anybody else and mentioned, if you had your compensation adjusted so in that long time, how would you feel? How would you feel about your value in the position? Probably wouldn't feel very good. I wouldn't feel good at all. And so for me, in that sense, I would have to agree with Commissioner Barr in this sense. And future boards may decide something different at that point. But for now, yeah, we need to consider a larger budget issues when the budget rolls around again. But the timing is much better now. Thank you.
You asked a question, how would you feel if you hadn't had a rate increase? And you said it for all on, listening, how did it feel? Darcy, how did it feel? You know, that's basically what happened with our unrepresented employees for how long is it, Steve, and his second units without a bankers, while the representative units went out to COLAs and some market business. It's it broke my heart, you know, and when we had that discussion, the tough discussion that we had, even then, many of your colleagues didn't feel fully respected at the time. Didn't make it. It's never respect.
I'll just say, Commissioner Barr, I was a staff member at this county in 2013. And I wrote a budget that would have almost eliminated my position. And so I'll tell you how it feels. Not great. And so I was also a staff member here when we did receive that compensation later, whatever year it was, 16 or something like that. And it felt really good. It felt really good to be acknowledged and recognized and understood, displayed by the commissioners. So I think it's important. And I also think that leadership is, we've talked a lot about leadership, but I think leadership is doing the right thing. Whether it plays well in the public eye or not. So I think we need to do the right thing. And that's how we measure.
Great thing, and I think it's someone who's new to this table or maybe a step from who doesn't feel awkward. Everything. I think it's the right thing, and I think it's a really important, as has been discussed, to issue equity and an investment in the future. If it doesn't take place until 2025, until after the next election, this really is for future commissioners, it's for the future. And for all the reasons stated.
Any other comments? Okay, so are we ready to entertain a motion? Anybody want to suggest a motion?
Okay, I'll make the motion to consider the option one from the elected officials compensation board. For approval.
We have a motion and a second. Any comments to?
Just to point out one item on that, and that is that this takes effect when something was dropped.
The effective date for the non-county commissioners is proposed to be retroactive to July 1, 2023, which is the beginning of the fiscal year. For the commissioners, it would be the first pay period following January 1st, 2020.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And then on the screen, Commissioner Trigger and Chris, can you? Wait, I see Commissioner Trigger. Chris, are you there? Are you voting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any opposed? I see 2 opposed. Okay. Motion passes. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. I appreciate it.
And if I may ask, Steve, this comes before the Board of Commissioners sometime in the next month or so.
We will work to get it on the agenda as soon as we can get the board orders and all.
But it's not satisfied until the Board of Commissioners.
I don't see anything else on the agenda. All right, so if there's nothing else, thank you for being here. Thank you for all of your comments and just having the work here that you've done today. So it's just. All right, I adjourn it. Thank you.
So the Orioles can do 2 things. They can win game 100. I can finish the division.